So if we look at some of the statements about reality, about scientific reality, that are there in the Qur'an, and we don't have time to go into them in great detail, but just as a sample, the indication that the Earth is a sphere rotating on its axis. In Surah Al-Zumar, verse 5, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يكور الليل على النهار ويكور النهار على الليل. He wraps the night over the day, and wraps the day over the night. Okay, and this verb yukawwir is used to talk about when you're wrapping a turban around your head. So here you have something that's going around a spherical object. The turban is being wrapped around the head, which is spherical. And so night is being wrapped over day, and day is being wrapped over night. And when you look at the Earth from space, you see that it's turning, that the area which was daylight is being overtaken and covered by night, and the part which was night is being overtaken and covered by daylight. So it gives you a very clear sense of something turning on a sphere. And then in Surah Al-A'raf, you have another snapshot of that reality. يغشي الليل النهار يطلبه حثيثا. He draws the night as a veil over the day, each seeking the other in rapid succession. Well, actually, there it's not explicit that each is seeking the other, but the pronouns allow it. And then you have walayli the as'as, which means the night when see, this verb as'asa has two meanings. One is to approach, and the other is to withdraw. And so the night is simultaneously, all the time, approaching some parts of the earth and withdrawing from other parts of the earth. So those are really, insightful and subtle descriptions of an astronomical reality. And then you have this verse in Surah Al-Dhuriyat, وَالسَّمَاءَ بَنَيْنَاهَا بِأَيْدٍ وَإِنَّا لَمُوسِعُونَ. We built the heaven with might, and we continue to expand. Okay, cause expansion, and then so therefore the direct object, the maf'ul bihi, is implied. Continue to expand it, meaning the heavens. And this is something that went completely against scientific, quote unquote, scientific knowledge, or the world view of people that were trying to examine reality philosophically and scientifically in that era. The Greeks, they had this idea of the heavens are these perfect crystal solids, a sphere inside a cube, inside a something or other. And, to show how much that idea was ingrained in human thinking, that Albert Einstein, when he came up with the theory of relativity, the implications of it were that the universe should be expanding. And he said, wait a minute, that can't be right. And so he came up with, he kind of out of his head, he invented something called the cosmological constant that would be some force that would prevent the universe from expanding. And so when they developed powerful enough telescopes, 10, 15 years after Einstein's first publishing of his theory, he published his theory, I believe, in 1905. By 1927, Edwin Hubble at the Mount Palomar observatory in California using this huge mirror telescope, the 200-inch mirror telescope, something like that. They were able to photograph the redshift. First of all, they were able to see galaxies besides the Milky Way. And then by photographing them through a spectrometer, they could tell by the redshift that these galaxies were moving away from us at various speeds. And so the inevitable conclusion was that the universe is expanding. The idea that there's a barrier between the seas, مرج البحرين يلتقيان بينهما برزخ لا يبغيان, Surah Al-Rahman, verses 19 and 20. He has loosed the two seas, they meet, there's a barrier between them, they encroach not one upon the other. Now, I didn't read this from a third party, but I remember listening to a tape of Shaykh Abdul Majid al-Zindani. He was describing a German oceanographical expedition that was studying the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. And they meet at the Bab al-Mandeb Straits between Yemen and Ethiopia. And they noticed that they take water readings in the Red Sea and then in the Indian Ocean there on the other side. And when it came to water temperature and salinity and density and various characteristics of the water, they noticed a difference between the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. And so they kept trying to find out, okay, this reading on this side different from this reading over there. And they kept taking readings closer and closer apart together until finally they had this place where they were taking readings on one side of the boat, and they were getting Red Sea readings, and taking readings on the other side of the boat and getting Indian Ocean readings. So, like I say, I don't have a third-party affirmation for what he said, but if what he says is accurate, then that's pretty amazing. Some people have read into the verse, وَالْأَرْضِ ذَاتِ الصَّدَعِ, that it's what it says, the translation, by the earth which splits, that it's a reference to this feature of the earth, the tectonic plates, and that the earth is always splitting. So the mid-Atlantic ridge, is a place where constantly lava is pushing up through this crack and pushing the plates apart. And that happens in other parts of the earth as well. So that, that could be, one could say, well, the splitting there could be, how the dirt splits apart when a seed sprouts out of it. So that's not a definitive sign, but it's possible. There's an interesting also variant explanation to something which had a traditional explanation in Surah Takwir. فَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِالْخُنَّسِ الْجَوَارِ الْكُنَّسِ. Nay, but I call to witness the planets that recede. Khunnas, that's from the same word as in Surah Al-Nas. Sharr al-waswas al-khannas. Shaitan, when you remember Allah, he pulls back, he recedes. So I call to witness the planets that recede, al-jawar al-kunnas, those that run their courses and disappear. Now, this meaning, this word kunnas is a very, when I first read it, it just raised questions in my mind, because when you're studying Arabic, you know that kanasa, the most dominant meaning of kanasa is to sweep, and miknasa is a broom. So how do you get disappearing from that verb? Well, you have this term kinas, which is a lair of a wild animal, especially gazelles and wild cows, in a thicket where it hides from the heat. So called because the animal brushes away the sand to uncover the moist earth. And kanasa yaknisu is from that, the verb kanasa yaknisu means an animal hides in its lair. And so then it refers to the disappearance of the stars by day, as if they're hiding in the light of the sun. And that's all, quite plausible. It makes sense linguistically, and it makes sense in terms of the phenomena that we observe. But if you look at the term, in its that other connotation of sweeping, you have this phenomenon of the really big planets, especially Jupiter, that it exerts such a powerful magnetic field that it sweeps the heavens clear of debris. So because of Jupiter, you have the asteroid belt. They're being held in place by Jupiter's gravitational field, and if it weren't for that, then this debris would probably be flying free and floating toward the Earth, and we would be hit by meteors and asteroids at a much greater rate than we are. And of course that would create major hazard to the continuation of life. In connection with that, there's, however, a theory that's seems to be the latest one with regard to the origin of water on the Earth, which is that there were all these frozen comets and stuff like that had large quantities of ice out there in the outer solar system, and that early on, after the creation of the Earth, that it was Jupiter's gravitational field that sort of swept those comets into the Earth, and just providing the Earth with this huge amount of water, which made life possible. Okay, to move on from scientific facts, one of the most amazing things in the Qur'an, really, to me, is this historical, the delicacy of the wording, and its accuracy. One of the claims is that, there's all these stories floating around in pre-Islamic Arabia that had been handed down from the Jews and the Christians, and you had Jews living in Medina. So these stories, these biblical stories, were floating around, and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he'd heard these stories and he just sort of retold them. So now one of the stories that's there in the Qur'an, and it's there in the Old Testament, is the story of Joseph alayhi salam. Now, if you look at the Old Testament version of that story, the ruler of Egypt in the story of Joseph is called the Pharaoh. And the term Fir'aun, of course, is used in the Qur'an, but it's only used in the story of Musa. And Musa came many hundreds of years after Yusuf alayhi salam. And the title that's used for the ruler in the story of Yusuf in the Qur'an is al-Malik, the king. And from historical records, which only became available after the Rosetta Stone was deciphered, when the French invaded Egypt and they took back this Rosetta Stone with them. That was in the 1800s, and it had two forms of Greek and hieroglyphics on it. And this brilliant French linguist, he cracked the code of the hieroglyphics. And after that, people were able to read hieroglyphics. So for thousands of years, people had been unable to read them. And then by reading hieroglyphics, then the history of ancient Egypt began to become clear. And one of the things that happened was there was an original dynasty rulers that came up from Egypt, the Old Kingdom. And then that was overthrown by invaders from the Near East, Palestine, that area, and they were called the Hyksos. And they ruled for a couple hundred years, and then they were overthrown by a native Egyptian dynasty. And it was only after the Hyksos were overthrown that Egyptian kings began to take that title of pharaoh for themselves. And so it turns out that the period of time that Joseph came to Egypt was when the Hyksos were ruling. And so that ruler would not have been called pharaoh or Pharaoh. So now the Bani Israel who entered Egypt through Yusuf, at first they had a privileged position under the Hyksos. And then when the Hyksos were overthrown, because they were considered also to be foreigners along with the Hyksos, then they ended up on the bottom strata of society, and they lived through all that suffering under Pharaoh. And by the time they left Egypt with Musa, their memory of the time of Yusuf, all the details were not very precise, so they backdated. They did this anachronism where they applied the term Pharaoh in their stories, which were related by oral history until they were eventually written down. They called the ruler at the time of Joseph Pharaoh, whereas he was not a pharaoh. So that's pretty amazing. If Muhammad ﷺ was copying stories that he'd heard from the Jews, then how on earth did he avoid that mistake? Predictions of the future. It's well known that the Romans have been defeated in the nearer land, and they, after their defeat, will be victorious within 10 years. And 7 years after that verse was revealed, the Romans did defeat the Persians. And then you have at the end of Surah Al-Fath, the mention that the Muslims would enter the Masjid al-Haram in safety, cutting their hair, shaving their hair. And so that prediction did indeed come true. And the prediction, سيهزم الجمع ويولون الدبر, in Surah Al-Qamar, that the amalgamated forces of the disbelievers would be defeated and turn tail and run. This was revealed in Makkah, and it came true at the Battle of Badr.